Juliana Marins was a young woman of 26 years old, full of life and with a huge passion for traveling and exploring the world. She was not only a talented publicist, but also an experienced backpacker who loved getting lost in new destinations, absorbing new cultures, and living intense experiences. She lived in Brazil, but had the free spirit of someone who seeks new things, always seeking new adventures and challenges. Her social media profile revealed a love for authentic, unhurried travel, for discovering unusual places and escaping the ordinary. Nature has always been his place of refuge. It was not uncommon to find Juliana in lush photos, surrounded by wild landscapes and challenging mountains. Her love for adventure led her to explore not only Brazil, but several countries around the world. Asia-Pac, where she immersed herself deeply in the local culture and connected with other travelers like her. When she decided to take a trip to Indonesia, specifically for the island of Lombok, she already had on her resume the feat of traveling to difficult-to-reach trails and destinations. She had a captivating energy, yet a calm outlook on life, always striving to grow with each step she took. Whether in her travels or in her work, she was a determined young woman, but also sensitive to the simple riches the world had to offer. It was precisely this search for new horizons that brought her to Mount Rinjani, the second highest volcano in Indonesia. Lombok, the island where the volcano is located, is known for its crystal-clear beaches and lush natural landscapes. However, its challenging trails also hide a hostile landscape for those who are not fully prepared. Juliana, with her wealth of experience and an unwavering desire to push her own limits, decided that Rinjani would be her next great destination. She was not alone in this dream. Juliana was accompanied by 2 certified local guides, a must for those wishing to climb the volcano. The plan was a challenging but rewarding journey, beginning with a strenuous morning hike and continuing to the summit, where she could admire one of the most spectacular views on the planet. For many, Rinjani represents overcoming a great physical and emotional challenge. For Juliana, it seemed like another maturing and learning experience, like all the trips she took. She arrived in Lombok full of enthusiasm, willing to overcome yet another obstacle, but also in search of peace and reflection amidst the immensity of nature. Her heart was light, her mind open to all that destiny had in store for her. Deep down, she knew she was doing something great. She knew this journey would require endurance, but she was ready. Mount Rinjani, with its imposing presence, did not seem threatening, but rather an invitation to another chapter in your journey. Nothing could have predicted what would happen in June 20th, 2025, but on that fateful day. The enchanting scenery of the trail around the crater, filled with mist and thin air, would turn into a nightmare. But before that, Juliana walked with hope and faith in her own steps, believing she was in control of what she loved so much: adventure. Mount Rinjani, at an impressive 3,126 meters high, is the second highest volcano in Indonesia, located on the island of Lombok. This majestic volcano has attracted tourists and adventurers from around the world, seeking physical and emotional challenge by conquering its imposing crater. The trail to the top of Rinjani is renowned for its difficulty, challenging even the most experienced trekkers. The landscape that unfolds along the way is of unique beauty: an immense crater with Lake Segara Anak, whose crystal-clear waters are sacred to the locals, in addition to the constant presence of the New Finger Mountain, an active volcanic cone. While the volcano's natural beauty is breathtaking, it also hides many dangers. Over the years, fatal accidents have occurred, making the trail even more feared. The trail to the top of Rinjani is considered one of the most difficult in Indonesia and the world. The hike requires not only physical fitness, but also mental stamina. Along the way, adventurers face extremely uneven terrain, with loose rocks, sandy soil, and steep sections that make the journey extremely strenuous. The weather can also be treacherous, changing dramatically as one ascends, with temperatures dropping as low as 4 degrees in some higher sections of the trail. Dense fog and volcanic dust, common during the hike, hinder visibility, making the hike even more challenging. Many tourists who venture on this trail have no idea of the difficulty it entails. leading to frequent accidents. The most common of these incidents are falls, especially on the steepest sections of the trail, which can be fatal in such deep and difficult-to-access areas. The risk scenario on Mount Rinjani is exacerbated by a lack of preparation and infrastructure. Many adventurers lack the necessary physical fitness or adequate equipment to tackle the trail. The lack of stricter regulations and more in-depth training for local guides also contributes to the growing number of accidents. Although it is mandatory for tourists to be accompanied by certified guides, many guides face the pressure of serving a growing number of tourists, often without proper support or resources. Furthermore, many tourists are not fully aware of the gravity of the challenge they are about to face. Without proper preparation and with inadequate safety infrastructure, Mount Rinjani has proven to be a dangerous place for those who disregard the volcano's natural beauty. In recent years, the number of accidents on the trail has increased considerably. In just a 5-year period, 180 serious accidents were registered, with at least 8 fatal victims. These alarming numbers indicate that, despite the region's tourist appeal, the volcano remains an extremely dangerous place. The most recent fatal accident, which occurred in 2024, had a profound impact on the adventure community. The number of deaths and injuries has been increasing, and this is directly related to the lack of infrastructure, insufficient safety conditions, and the increase in the number of unprepared tourists. The rescue process on the Mount Rinjani trails is another critical factor contributing to the high number of fatalities. Remote location. The difficult terrain and difficult access make rescue an extremely difficult and time-consuming task. In the case of Juliana Marins, for example, the rescue was extremely challenging. Even though she was quickly located by drones, Juliana was in an area inaccessible on foot. The weather conditions, with fog and strong winds, made access even more difficult for rescuers. The ropes used in the attempt to rescue Juliana were not long enough, and the lack of visibility caused the rescue to be interrupted several times. This lack of preparation and the natural obstacles led to a significant delay in the rescue, increasing Juliana's suffering and making the rescue even more difficult. The first attempt to rescue Juliana took place the day after her accident, but the lack of adequate equipment and the rugged terrain made the situation even more difficult. The rescue only progressed 150 meters on the first day, and the rescuers were 350 meters away when they had to stop the operation due to severe weather and darkness. The situation was further aggravated by the lack of accurate information about what Juliana had experienced. Rumors circulated that she had been fed and warmed with food and clothing provided by rescuers, but these reports were denied by the family. Juliana remained without food, water, or adequate clothing for the intense cold, which may have further aggravated her condition. As the rescue continued, the weather worsened, and helicopters also faced difficulties due to poor visibility. Local authorities eventually decided to close the park to concentrate rescue efforts, but time was running out. Even with helicopters and well-trained rescue teams, terrain conditions and equipment limitations prevented faster action. The use of ropes and the descent efforts of teams with many limited resources only prolonged the search, which was already becoming desperate. After more than 90 hours, after continuous attempts, Juliana was finally found dead. The death of Juliana Marins has raised several questions about safety on Mount Rinjani and the effectiveness of rescue protocols. The lack of adequate equipment, limited rescue infrastructure, and the slow response from local authorities were criticized by Juliana's family and friends. The tragedy also highlighted the high risks that the volcano represents, especially for those who are not properly prepared for the adversities of the trail. While Mount Rinjani remains one of Indonesia's biggest tourist attractions, with its stunning and challenging landscapes, tourist safety must be a priority. Juliana Marins' tragedy raises the urgent need for security reforms and infrastructure to ensure that more lives are not lost. Changes in redemption policies, such as improving conditions for rescue teams and expanding the equipment available, are essential to prevent tragedies like this from happening again. The trail's growing popularity demands a coordinated response to ensure the safety of all those seeking to overcome the challenges offered by Mount Rinjani. Juliana Marins 26, was a vibrant young woman, known for her passion for travel and adventure. A publicist by training, she found in backpacking and hiking in various countries a way to express her freedom and self-sufficiency. Over the years, she had explored various parts of Brazil and Asia and was recognized for her fearless spirit and independence. Juliana wasn't afraid to venture out alone, but she also knew that the right company, such as other backpackers or experienced guides, could enrich her experiences. With a backpack full of dreams, she decided that the Mount Rinjani in Indonesia would be her next challenge. The immense crater, the lush volcanic landscape, and Lake Segara Anak, known as the Lake of the Sea Child, caught her attention, and like any adventurer, she felt it would be the perfect place to test her limits. However, what seemed like another experience of overcoming and beauty quickly turned into an unexpected nightmare, and the tragedy that followed would forever mark her life and that of her family. In June 2025, Juliana arrived at Lombok, a paradisiacal island in Indonesia, ready to face the ascent of Mount Rinjani, one of the country's highest and most dangerous volcanoes. The Rinjani Trail is renowned for its physical and emotional demands. It consists of several stages and elevation gains, with the path around the crater being one of the most challenging. As if the uneven terrain and natural obstacles weren't enough, the hike requires endurance in the intense cold, constant fog, and often volcanic dust that rises from the depths of the volcano. To face this difficult and dangerous trail, Juliana was accompanied by 2 certified local guides, as required by law for anyone wishing to undertake this type of climb. The presence of guides should have provided her with the necessary safety, especially considering that the trail around the volcano's crater is one of the most treacherous, with unstable terrain and dangerous inclines. The pair of guides, experienced and familiar with the nuances of the trail, should have accompanied Juliana closely, ensuring her safety throughout the entire route. However, what happened next could not have been predicted. According to reports, at the beginning of the walk, Juliana seemed to be doing well, but as time went on, the effort began to take its toll. Physical demands of the trail was visible, and the altitude and cold were probably taking their toll on her body. Juliana asked for a break, as she was feeling tired. It was a seemingly harmless pause, a moment to recover and move on. However, that moment was the starting point for what would be an unexpected tragedy. The exact details of what happened next are somewhat hazy. It's unclear whether Juliana was truly alone at the time of the accident, or whether she was left behind by the guides, which raises questions about the care given to her at this critical moment. One thing is certain: in a moment of distraction or inattention, Juliana ended up getting separated from the guides. She was in a dangerous area of the trail, on unstable and uneven terrain. That's where the accident happened. Juliana apparently slipped on a steep bank, which led to a fatal fall. The descent was abrupt and violent, and the young woman ended up reaching a depth of over 600 meters, becoming completely trapped. The difficult terrain and the depth of the accident made the situation desperate. Although she tried to get up and move, each movement seemed to result in another fall. This caused Juliana to be trapped even deeper in the abyss. Juliana's situation was extremely serious. She was left there, in that inaccessible location, without access to water, food, or any kind of help. However, despite the catastrophic fall, Juliana remained alive. This can be attributed to her willpower and resilience, characteristics that have always accompanied her during her travels and challenges. She tried to resist, and the day after the accident, she was located by a drone, who saw her trapped in the crater, still crying for help. She was visible, but the difficult terrain prevented any immediate rescue. The place where Juliana was inaccessible by conventional trails. The depth and steepness of the terrain made rescue an extremely difficult challenge. The area where she fell was completely isolated, and access by common paths was limited. Impossible on foot, even if rescuers knew where she was. They couldn't reach her without specialized equipment. Rescue would have to be done with ropes or advanced climbing techniques, but the difficulties began to mount. Time passed, and the situation worsened. Rescue teams, after being alerted to the accident, began arriving. But unfortunately, the difficult terrain, adverse weather conditions, and the lack of visibility due to fog prevented rescuers from advancing quickly. Although they were relatively close from Juliana, 350 meters distance didn't seem like much, but under the conditions in which the rescue was taking place, it seemed like an insurmountable distance. During the first day of the rescue, only 250 meters were covered, which demonstrated the slow pace of the process. The physical effort was exhausting, and limited visibility further compounded the difficulties. As time passed, rescuers faced several challenges. Ropes used for rescue were not long enough to reach the depth at which Juliana was trapped. Descent attempts were intermittent, with pauses for reassessment, and the arrival of helicopters, although an option, was hampered by fog and strong winds. On several occasions, efforts were halted due to extreme weather conditions. The rescue team also had to deal with lack of visibility and with the risks inherent to a rescue operation in such complex terrain. Juliana, meanwhile, remained there, trapped and fighting against time. The lack of food, water, and adequate clothing to cope with the intense cold were other factors that contributed to the worsening of her situation. The rescue operation, already lengthy, faced an even more difficult reality. The work was slow, the conditions were adverse, and every second became even more critical for the young woman. The race against time began as soon as rescuers arrived at the accident site. Juliana's situation, trapped at the bottom of the crater, was desperate. The situation was made worse by the lack of food, water, and clothing, which directly contributed to Juliana's physical and psychological exhaustion. The young woman, already weakened by the fall of over 600 meters, now faced a battle against the extreme cold, the altitude, and the lack of vital resources for survival. With each passing hour, her chances of survival diminished, and the clock became her greatest enemy. The weather on Mount Rinjani, already notoriously unpredictable and difficult, proved to be another obstacle during the rescue. On the first day of the operation, rescuers made only 250 meters towards Juliana, a considerable distance, but still far from reaching its location. The terrain conditions were challenging, with access hampered by the steepness of the ravine and loose rocks that made any movement extremely dangerous. Furthermore, the scarce time and the mounting pressure further heightened the tension of the entire operation. The expectation of finding Juliana quickly was soon replaced by the harsh reality that the rescue would be far more complex than anyone had imagined. Despite all efforts, the journey to reach Juliana seemed to be increasingly difficult due to adverse conditions. Unstable ground and the deep emptiness. The crater's narrow slopes forced rescuers to descend with extreme caution and take regular breaks due to the physical exertion required to overcome the difficult access. During the first day, the team couldn't advance far enough to reach it, and the 250-meter advance was a reminder that each step had to be taken cautiously, but without losing sight of the precious time that was slipping away. As the first day of rescues dragged on without success, frustration and pressure mounted. Weather conditions have worsened, with the dense fog and strong winds further hampered rescue attempts. Aerial access, which could have been an option, was also cut off due to low visibility. The helicopters, called to assist in the rescue, faced serious difficulties flying amid the severe weather, making coordination even more difficult. Even with the use of drones, which had located Juliana the day before, the terrain and weather conditions made the rescue a much more complex challenge than expected. With each passing day, the chances of success diminished, and the emotional insecurity, the burden of the rescue team also increased. The physical strain of climbing such difficult terrain, combined with the psychological pressure of knowing that a life was at risk, made the rescuers feel even more pressured. They needed to act quickly, but without losing the necessary caution to ensure their own safety. Hours were becoming precious, and the race against time was far from over. On the second day of rescue, Juliana's situation became even more critical. Without food, water, or any kind of protection against the intense cold, she found herself alone and desperate, unsure of what was happening above the crater. There was no clear information about when she would be rescued, and her endurance was being tested by the minute. The rescuers continued to advance, But at their exhausting pace, they were barely making progress. Throughout the day, they faced new obstacles, including extreme physical strain and the limitations of the ropes and equipment, which were not sufficient to reach the depth necessary to quickly rescue Juliana. The emotional and psychological pressure on the rescuers was also mounting. They knew time was of the essence, but the situation was incredibly difficult. Visibility deteriorated by the hour, and their physical exhaustion became evident as the cold and exhaustion made their movements felt. The rescue team was in constant communication, discussing the best way to descend to Juliana, but the decisions they made never seemed sufficient to achieve their goal. As the day wore on, the feeling of frustration and despair grew, both for the rescuers and for their families, who anxiously awaited news. As rescue attempts continued, the emotional pressure also intensified. The Juliana's family were receiving scant information, and the doubt about the success of the rescue was a constant burden. The information released by the press and rescuers was often unclear, further compounding the family's suffering. Some people said they had seen videos and heard false reports that Juliana had already been rescued, creating enormous confusion. This only heightened the pain and anguish of those waiting for answers. An air of uncertainty hung over everyone involved in the operation, and the only common desire was to find Juliana and bring her back alive. The third day of the rescue arrived, and attempts to reach Juliana continued to be frustrated. The rescuers' physical exhaustion was becoming unbearable, and with each pause, they wondered if they would be able to complete the mission before it was too late. They were fighting an invisible enemy, time. Every second that passed increased the severity of Juliana's situation, and the effort to rescue her seemed never enough. The pain of not being able to reach her quickly weighed heavily on the rescuers, and everyone wondered if the weather conditions and uneven terrain could truly be overcome. Meanwhile, Juliana's family's grief intensified with each passing hour. They had hope, but that hope turned to fear with each passing day. Without positive news, the emotional toll of knowing that a loved one was alone in a distant crater, without vital resources, deeply affected everyone awaiting rescue. There were no words to comfort them. All that was left was to wait anxiously and pray that rescuers would finally reach Juliana before it was too late. Despite the immense challenges the rescue team faced, there was a clear determination not to give up. Every movement, every step taken toward Juliana was a small victory in the fight against relentless nature and the fleeting clock. But reality was becoming increasingly distressing, and the fear that the story would have a tragic ending became a growing possibility. The third day of rescues was drawing to a close, and hope was fading. The fight against time, adverse conditions, and their own fatigue was leaving everyone exhausted. However, the last thing anyone wanted was to abandon the mission, even knowing the situation was desperate. Everyone knew Juliana's life was at stake, and continued effort was necessary. Even when it seemed like there was no hope left, desperation was becoming an invisible force, guiding every action. But the question still lingered. Would they make it in time? Juliana Marins' tragedy not only deeply shook her family and friends, but also sparked intense debate about trail safety. Mount Rinjani, the responsibility of local authorities, tour guides, and everyone involved in adventure tourism. What was supposed to be a simple adventure for a young woman with a spirit of exploring the world turned into an irreversible tragedy, raising questions about preparation and safety protocols on high-risk trails like Rinjani. The question that echoes in the hearts of everyone who followed Juliana's case is, who is responsible for the death of a young woman full of life on a trail famous for its difficulty and lack of adequate rescue facilities? It cannot be ignored that, in many cases, the causes of accidents are a combination of factors. And this one was no different. For many, the blame falls on the guides, who should have paid extra attention to Juliana's safety, especially after she asked for a break and left the group. They were responsible not only for guiding her, but for ensuring her safety along a treacherous route. However, the failure lies not only with the guides, but also with failed security protocol who failed to anticipate the real risk the trail poses. How can such an imposing and popular volcano not have adequate safety features to protect tourists who venture there? The Juliana tragedy also reveals the flaws in the structures of rescue and accident response, which were slow, disorganized, and efficient. If local authorities had been quicker and more efficient, perhaps the outcome would have been different. It is impossible not to reflect on the merciless nature of the volcano. The Mount Rinjani, with its stunning and majestic beauty, is also a constant reminder of how nature can be relentless and how it should be respected, never underestimated. The immensity of its crater and the height of its peaks are not only a metaphor for the grandeur of life, but also for the silent danger that lurks in all natural grandeur. Juliana's tragedy, though devastating, could have been avoided, or at least its risks minimized, with greater preparation, awareness, and infrastructure. Juliana, a young woman full of dreams and a passion for life, unfortunately became yet another victim of extreme risk, which in many cases, is poorly managed by security systems and local authorities. She was an experienced backpacker who traveled through several countries, but nature, in this case, proved to be stronger than any human preparation. The story of Juliana Marins is, at the same time, a personal tragedy and a warning to all adventurers seeking to explore the wildest corners of the world. His case brings to light the dark side of adventures, the fine line between the pleasure of discovery and the risk that can become fatal. Mount Rinjani remains one of the most sought-after destinations for those who want to test their limits. But the risk of further tragedies remains. As adventure tourism grows, the need for review of safety conditions on the most dangerous trails becomes increasingly urgent. Juliana's case exposes the fragility of the rescue system, and the lack of resources to address them is a reflection of deficiencies in several areas of local tourism. In addition to the grief and immeasurable pain of Juliana's loss, her family and friends were faced with a heavy bureaucracy and logistical difficulties to bring his body back to Brazil. While they tried to overcome the emotional hardships, they now found themselves fighting against a system that was unprepared to deal with tragedies of this magnitude. Once again, the system failed. The tragedy, besides the loss of a precious life, revealed the lack of assistance and care, with family members who must be treated with more respect and dignity, especially when they face such a brutal and unexpected loss. The story of Juliana Marins, a young woman who loved to travel and explore the world, should never be forgotten. She is more than a sad and painful memory. She is a living reminder for all who venture into the wild and unforgiving world of nature. It is a reminder that safety should never be neglected, especially in high-risk locations. His departure, marked by a series of errors and failures in various security instances, is a reality check for those who face nature without understanding its magnitude and without adequately preparing themselves. Juliana's adventurous spirit will never be forgotten, but her story should serve as a point of deep reflection on how adventure tourism should be conducted more responsibly and safely. Local authorities, tour guides, adventurers, and people around the world need to understand that adventures like Juliana's require more than courage and daring. They require respect, preparation, and a non-negotiable commitment to safety. Juliana's loss must be the trigger for significant changes in adventure tourism, so that tragedies like hers never happen again. Juliana Marins should not only be remembered for her death, but also for legacy of transformation that your story can generate in the world of adventure tourism. May your life inspire real change, with more protection and support for those who decide to challenge nature so boldly. May your memory be honored with a world where safety and human life are paramount, maximum value, and where the flaws that led to his tragedy are corrected, so that no other adventurer has to pay with their life for a dream of exploring the unknown.